The September sun cast a bright light on the Portsmouth High School soccer field as Grayson Page stood on the sideline watching the team warm up. A new season was just beginning, but he already felt this year was going to be special. The Portsmouth Pirates had made it to the state finals 2 years in a row, and this year they had a good chance to take the title. He had spent the last 3 months preparing the team for this season, holding extra practices even in the summer heat. The whistle split the air. Grayson ran a hand through his short-cropped dark hair and headed toward the center of the field. In his 32 years, he still retained the athleticism of a former quarterback, and his team leadership style had earned him the respect of players and other coaches alike. Every morning he ran 5 miles along the ocean, keeping himself in perfect shape, an old habit from his college days where he had been a star on the varsity team. Across the field, the cheerleading team was starting their practice. Grayson had never really paid much attention to them. But today, something made him hold his gaze. The new captain of the cheerleading team was performing a difficult acrobatic element, and he could feel the unusual grace of Sky Everdeen in her movements. He remembered the name from the senior class roster. She was one of the top students in the school, qualifying for athletic scholarships to prestigious colleges. "Coach Page, check out the new combination!" shouted one of the players, and Grayson tore his gaze away from cheerleading practice with an effort. For the rest of the day, he tried to concentrate on working with the team, but his gaze kept returning to the other end of the field. On his way home in the evening, Grayson felt a familiar heaviness. He had another quiet dinner waiting for him with Mercedes, his wife of the past 5 years. She worked in school administration, and their marriage had once seemed like the perfect union. Now, it was as if there was an invisible wall of reticence and cooled feelings between them. He remembered how they had met at a school fundraiser, how she had charmed him with her elegance and intelligence. It had seemed then that they were perfect for each other. "How was your first day of training?" Mercedes asked, setting out the plates. Her movements were polished as always. She liked order and control in everything. "It's fine. The team is in good shape," Grayson replied, avoiding her gaze. He knew his wife would notice his absent-mindedness. She always noticed the slightest change in his mood. "You were late again." "I had to finalize the plan for the season." Dinner passed in the customary silence. Mercedes was immersed in her phone, and Grayson pretended to be engrossed in the sports news on TV. He remembered a time when their evenings had been filled with conversation and laughter. Now, however, every meal turned into a silent confrontation. The next day in the school cafeteria, he overheard a conversation about a new restaurant on the waterfront. Everdeen Grill was its name. The owner, Brooke Everdeen, had quickly gained a reputation as a talented chef and a strict but fair boss. Grayson remembered seeing her at parent-teacher conferences, a tall woman with a penetrating gaze and perfect posture. Now he realized from whom Sky had inherited her grace. Brooke was a well-known figure in town. After her divorce, she'd managed to build a successful business and raise her daughter alone. A week later, during a joint soccer and cheerleading practice, Grayson spoke to Sky for the first time. She had come in to discuss the cheerleading schedule for the upcoming games. She had the confidence of someone who was used to accomplishing her goals. Her long blonde hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and her green eyes had a mischievous sparkle in them. She held herself with an unchildlike collectedness that made her even more attractive. "Mr. Page, we've prepared a new program for the season opener," she said, handing him a sheet with a performance plan. She smelled of vanilla and something fresh, like a sea breeze. Their fingers casually touched, and Grayson felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to focus on his schedule, but caught himself returning his gaze to her face again and again. At one point their eyes met, and he saw in her gaze a reflection of his own excitement. That evening, lying awake in his bedroom, Grayson thought about how one casual touch could stir up long-forgotten feelings. Mercedes was sleeping quietly beside him, and he looked into the darkness and realized that his life, so right and planned, was beginning to crack. He tried to convince himself that it was just a momentary weakness, that tomorrow everything would fall into place. During those same hours at the Everdeen Grill, Brooke was closing the restaurant, and Sky was helping her with the cleanup. Mother and daughter worked in silence, each immersed in her own thoughts, Brooke furtively watched her daughter, noticing how she had changed over the summer. There was a new, grown-up confidence about her, as if she had finally realized her own attractiveness and strength. Sky had become increasingly withdrawn over the past few months, and it worried Brooke. "How's school going?" Brooke asked, wiping down the bar stool. She tried to speak casually, though her motherly heart felt it. Something was going on with her girl. "It's okay. I'm captain of the cheerleaders this year," Sky replied, smiling. But the smile didn't touch her eyes. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Just don't forget about your studies." Sky nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She was thinking about Coach Page and the way he'd looked at her at practice today. There was something about that look that made her heart start to beat faster. She knew those thoughts were dangerous, that she needed to put them out of her mind, but she couldn't stop thinking about the casual touch of his hand. The new school year was just beginning in Portsmouth, and no one had any idea what events would unfold on this small patch of land between the sea and the pines in the coming months. The town lived its usual life. Fishermen were out to sea at dawn, tourists wandered along the waterfront, school children were preparing for the new school year. But beneath this peaceful surface, a storm was already brewing that would change the lives of many people forever. October colored Portsmouth's trees in gold and purple. After another Pirates victory, Grayson lingered in his office, parsing the game notes. A knock on the door made him raise his head. Standing on the threshold was Sky, still in her cheerleader uniform. "Can I come in? I wanted to discuss the new elements of the program." Her voice sounded unsure, which was uncharacteristic of her. They talked about practice, about school, about the future. Sky dreamed of going to Stanford, tutoring. Grayson listened, oblivious to the time, fascinated by her vivacity and intelligence. When she finally left, it was already dark. Their chance encounters became more and more frequent. After practice, Sky would ostensibly stay late to work on difficult elements. Grayson would find reasons to stay late at school. They talked for hours, keeping a safe distance from each other at first, but gradually the distance shrank. Mercedes began to notice changes in her husband. He became absent-minded, checking his phone often, staying late at work. One evening, she found a receipt from the Everdeen Grill in his jacket pocket. "Are you eating at the restaurant now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice sounding casual. "Sometimes I stop by with coworkers," Grayson replied, not taking his eyes off his laptop. At school, Sky was spending more and more time alone. Her best friend Ashley had tried several times to find out what was going on, but ran into a wall of silence. After school, Sky no longer joined in the cafeteria after school, citing studying for exams. The first kiss happened in an empty gym after a particularly successful game. Sky was helping put away equipment when Grayson got too close. The moment stretched into eternity, and then reality shattered into shards. They recoiled from each other when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Brooke began to notice a change in her daughter's behavior. Sky became taciturn, often cloudy-eyed. One evening, she saw her daughter furtively wiping away tears while looking at her phone. "You can tell me anything that's bothering you," Brooke said. But Sky only shook her head. The next day in the teacher's lounge, Mercedes overheard the two teachers talking. "Did you notice the way he's looking at her?" The English teacher whispered. "At who?" "At the captain of the cheerleaders. They say she hangs out in his office after school all the time." The conversation broke off when the conversationalists noticed Mercedes. She felt the ground go from under her feet. Their first real encounter had been out of town. Grayson picked Sky up after practice, and they drove to the ocean. The cold wind fluttered their hair, and they sat in the car holding hands and talking about what couldn't be done, but was already inevitable. "We have to be careful," Grayson said, kissing her fingers. "I know we do, but I can't stop thinking about you," Sky whispered. They'd met in secret, in empty classrooms, in his car in a deserted parking lot by the marina. Once they'd even ventured out to dinner in a neighboring town. Each meeting was drenched in fear of exposure and a burning desire to be together. Rumors started flying around the school. Nothing concrete, just whispers behind their backs, meaningful glances. Ashley tried to talk to Sky directly. "You're acting weird. And those conversations?" "What conversations?" Sky felt her heart go into overdrive. "About you and Coach Page, people notice the way you look at each other." Sky cut her friend short and walked away, feeling her cheeks burning. Mercedes began to keep tabs on her husband. She checked his phone when he was in the shower, studying the call detail. Grayson became even more distant, hardly speaking to her at all. One day she found a bracelet in his glove compartment, a thin silver chain with a star-shaped pendant. "Is it a present?" she asked that evening. "What?" Grayson went pale when he saw the bracelet in her hands. "Don't make a fool of me, Grayson." He took the bracelet and left, slamming the door. He didn't come home that night, and Sky lay sleepless in her room, staring at her phone. The last message from him read, "We need to talk. Things are getting too complicated." She felt like their little world was on the verge of collapse, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. A new customer came into the Everdeen Grill, Mrs. Thornton, the wife of a local detective. She had a long talk with Brooke about the town gossip, and among other things mentioned the strange rumors going around the high school cheerleading squad. Brooke felt her back grow cold. She thought back to all the oddities in her daughter's behavior over the past weeks, and suddenly a picture began to take shape. Meanwhile, Grayson and Sky met at their usual spot by the ocean. Both realized their secret was about to be revealed, but couldn't find the strength to stop. "What should we do?" Sky asked, looking out at the dark waves. "I don't know," Grayson answered honestly, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "But I can't lose you." The November air was soaked with cold and the foreboding of winter. Mercedes sat in her office in the administrative wing of the school, mechanically poring over papers. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd gathered enough evidence. Printouts of messages, photos of Grayson's car at the marina, bills from restaurants in the neighboring town. She methodically put them into a folder, trying to decide what to do with this information. There was an untouched cup of coffee on the table, her third this morning. Sleepless nights had left dark circles under her eyes that even flawless makeup couldn't hide. The last printout lay in the folder, a picture of Grayson and Sky in a coffee shop in a neighboring town. They were sitting in a far corner, thinking no one would notice them. But a small town is full of eyes and ears. A waitress, a former Portsmouth High School student, recognized them and took a picture. For a small fee, the photo ended up in Mercedes's possession. At the same time, Sky was trying to concentrate in chemistry class. Her phone vibrated. A message from Grayson. "Meet me today. Need to talk." She felt nausea coming up to her throat. The last few days had been unbearable. The constant fear, the guilt, the inability to trust anyone. The formulas on the blackboard blurred before her eyes. Her chemistry teacher, Mr. Donovan, had asked her twice if she was okay. She looked paler than usual. At recess, Sky locked herself in the bathroom stall and reread their correspondence from the past week. Grayson was becoming increasingly nervous, paranoid. He kept changing meeting places, insisting on being even more careful. And yesterday, for the first time, he'd talked about how they needed to take a break. After class, Ashley intercepted her at her locker. She was nervously rubbing some kind of sheet in her hands. Sky recognized their photo together from last year's prom. "I can't keep quiet anymore, Sky. What's happening is wrong. If you don't stop, I'm going to the principal." Sky stared at her friend, not recognizing her face contorted with righteous anger. 10 years of friendship, all the secrets, all the joys and sorrows, and now this wall of misunderstanding between them. "You don't understand anything," was all she could squeeze out. There was a lump in her throat. "I understand everything, Sky. He's the one who seduced you, used you. You're not the first. There were other girls before you." Those words hit harder than a slap in the face. Sky turned around and ran for the exit, unable to see the road. The Everdeen Grill was unusually crowded that evening, and Brooke spotted Mercedes Page among them. She was sitting alone, sipping wine and making notes in a notebook. When their gazes met, Brooke sensed a cold determination in the woman's eyes. Something in her posture, in the way she methodically took notes, reminded Brooke of a predator preparing to leap. Mercedes finished her second glass of wine and called for the waitress. As she punched the bill, Brooke noticed a corner of a photograph peeking out of Mercedes's purse. Sky was in the picture. Grayson was waiting for Sky at their usual spot, the deserted parking lot by the lighthouse. The old lighthouse had been out of business for a long time, but was still a popular spot for tourists during the summer season. Now, in November, no one was looking in here. When she got into the car, he didn't kiss her like he usually did. He smelled like whiskey. It was unlike the usually collected Coach Page. "Mercedes knows," he said deafeningly. "She's gathered evidence, threatened to tell everyone." Sky felt the world around her begin to crumble. Scraps of today's conversation with Ashley flashed through her mind. What do we do? We need to stop this. Now. I can't lose my job, my reputation. You promised we could do this. Sky's voice shook. You said you loved me, that we'd leave after graduation. I was an irresponsible idiot. You're just a kid and I... Don't you dare pretend this was a mistake. All these months, all your words. What, that was a mistake too? She jumped out of the car and ran toward the ocean. The wind off the sea fluttered her hair, tears freezing on her cheeks. Grayson caught up with her at the water's edge. She had tracked down her husband, finally deciding to come clean. In the glove compartment of her car was a gun. She had taken it from the safe this morning, not knowing why. In the headlights, she saw two figures by the water. Her hand clutched the evidence folder. Brooke was on her way to the lighthouse, too. After Mercedes left the restaurant, she found a forgotten photograph on her table. When she saw the shot of her daughter with her coach, she realized she could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening. There was a gun in the glove compartment of her car, too, an old revolver left by her ex-husband. The cold wind fluttered Sky's hair as she shouted to Grayson everything that had built up over the months. About love, about betrayal, about her shattered dreams, about how she'd believed every word he'd said, how she'd planned their future. He tried to comfort her, to take her by the shoulders, but she pushed his hands away. Footsteps were heard in the darkness. They turned around and saw a figure approaching. Something glinted metal in its hand. Grayson instinctively stepped forward, covering Sky with himself. A shot rang out. Then a second. Grayson's body collapsed to the wet sand. Sky screamed, and her scream merged with the sound of waves and seagulls. 15 minutes later, the first police car arrived on the scene. Detective Reed Thornton stepped out into the drizzling rain, looking at the body sprawled at the water's edge. Nearby, paramedics were treating a girl in a state of shock. A little farther away, police officers were interviewing two women, both looking calm, too calm to witness a murder. "What have we got?" Thornton asked the first officer who arrived on the scene. "Grayson Page, 32 years old, high school coach, 2 gunshot wounds, chest and head. Gun was found in the water. There are 3 witnesses." Thornton looked out at the dark ocean, then at the frozen figures of the witnesses. 1 murder, 3 women, each with a different motive. A cell phone buzzed in his raincoat pocket. The station was calling. Another witness claimed to have seen a 4th man in the parking lot shortly before the shots were fired. It's going to be a long investigation. Detective Reed Thornton spent a sleepless night at Portsmouth Police Station, piecing together the first pieces of the puzzle. The man killed was Grayson Page, respected coach, model family man. 2 bullets fired at close range. A Smith & Wesson pistol registered to Mercedes Page. 3 women at the scene, each telling their version of events. The morning began with an interview with Sky Everdeen. Pale, wan-eyed, she sat across from Thornton, rubbing the sleeve of her sweater absent-mindedly. "Tell me again what you were doing in the parking lot at the lighthouse." "I already told you. We were meeting Grayson there with Mr. Page." "How long did your relationship last?" 2 months, maybe a little longer." Thornton watched her reactions carefully. The girl was clearly traumatized, but kept herself collected. There was no attempt to vindicate herself or sugarcoat the situation in her story. Mercedes Page was next. She entered the interrogation room with a perfectly straight back, wearing a strict black suit. "Is that your gun, Mrs. Page?" "Yes, I kept it in the safe at home, for self-defense." "When was the last time you checked the safe?" "A week ago. The gun was still there." "Why did you come to the lighthouse that night?" "I was following my husband. I wanted proof of his infidelity." There were no tears or hysteria in her voice, just cold fury. Brooke Everdeen looked 10 years older. She smoked incessantly, leaving cigarette butt after cigarette butt in the ashtray. I found out about their connection by accident. Heard a conversation in a restaurant. People in small towns like to gossip. Why didn't you go to the police or the school authorities? I wanted to talk to him myself, scare him, make him stay away from my daughter. At school, the news of Coach Page's death had a bombshell effect. Thornton spent the day interviewing teachers and students. Gradually, the story of the secret affair grew in detail. Ashley Hawthorne, Sky's best friend, described her friend's strange behavior in recent months. She's changed, became secretive, stopped socializing. And then I saw them together outside his car. He was holding her hand. The English literature teacher recalled a strange conversation with Mercedes a week before the murder. She asked if I had noticed anything unusual. She seemed very agitated. Hidden love notes were found in Grayson's office. His cell phone revealed hundreds of messages sent from an unknown number. In Sky's locker, they found a picture of the two of them on the beach, smiling, in love. Thornton methodically collected evidence. Ballistics confirmed the bullets came from a Mercedes gun. They found fingerprints on the gun, but they were smudged. Surveillance cameras at a gas station near the lighthouse recorded 3 cars heading toward the crime scene a few minutes apart. The new witness came out of the blue. An old lighthouse keeper recalled seeing a female figure hiding behind rocks an hour before the murder. She was wearing dark clothes. I thought she was a tourist, wanting to take a picture of the sunset. Rumors began to swirl in the town. Some blamed the jealous wife, others the angry mother. Some whispered that Sky herself had killed her lover when he decided to leave her. Thornton tested every theory. He studied the financial documents of the Page family. It turned out that shortly before his death, Grayson withdrew a large sum from his account. Mercedes's cell phone contained photos of her husband and Sky taken secretly. A hidden gun, the exact same model as the murder weapon, was found in Brooks' restaurant. Each of the women had a motive. Each was at the scene of the crime. Each could have pulled the trigger. But something about the story kept Thornton on edge. A little detail he couldn't quite grasp. He went back over and over again to the case file, looking at the crime scene photos, rereading the testimony, and then he noticed something he'd missed before. A tiny detail in one of the forensics photos. A detail that completely changed the picture of the crime. Thornton reached for the phone. It was time to make another call. Detective Thornton was spending his 3rd sleepless night reviewing case files. The office smelled of cold coffee and fatigue. He returned again and again to the crime scene photos until his eye caught on a detail everyone had missed. A crumpled receipt from the Everdeen grill wedged between rocks not far from the body. Written on the back was the phrase, "I'll tell you everything today. Sorry." The handwriting was smooth, confident, clearly not written in a hurry. Thornton pulled handwriting samples from all the suspects. The handwriting was Grayson's. He started unraveling the tangle all over again. The first thing he called Ashley Hawthorne, Sky's best friend who worked part-time at Brooks' restaurant, in for questioning. "Tell me again about that day," he asked, watching the girl's reactions carefully. Ashley was nervous, constantly rubbing a strand of hair, avoiding a direct look. "I was working the morning shift. Mr. Page came in around 11, ordered only coffee." "Was he alone?" "At first, yes. Then Mrs. Page came over." "You heard them talking?" Ashley turned pale. "They were talking quietly, but Mrs. Page was very angry. I've never seen her like that." Thornton pulled out the phone records. "After they left, you called Sky. The conversation lasted 17 minutes. What did you talk about?" Ashley burst into tears. "Mercedes threatened to tell everyone, not just about Sky, about all the girls, about the ones before her." "Other girls?" 3 years ago, there was a practicum student named Laura Simmons. She left suddenly in the middle of the semester. Then a young gym teacher. She quit quickly, too. Everyone knew, but they kept quiet. I mean, he was the star of the school, everyone's favorite. Thornton delved into the school archives. Indeed, over the past 5 years, several young women had left the school abruptly. He tracked down Laura Simmons, now living in Oregon. "He knew how to persuade," she said by phone. "Said I was special, that I understood him like no one else. And then I found out I wasn't the only one so special." The new testimony forced the detective to review the entire case file. He questioned Mercedes Page again. "Have you been aware of your husband's other relationships for a long time?" Thornton asked. looking at the impeccably dressed woman across the table. From the beginning, Mercedes spoke softly but firmly. The first time I noticed a change in his behavior was 3 years ago. New messages, late returns, unexpected business trips, classic of the genre. Why didn't you leave? You don't understand. It wasn't just a marriage, it was picture perfect. A successful coach, his devoted wife. Everyone knew us, everyone was jealous. I couldn't just walk away. But it was different with Sky? Mercedes showed emotion for the first time. Her hands trembled. He fell in love. For real. I found plane tickets on his computer, 2 tickets to California the day after graduation. He was planning to drop everything and go with her. Thornton went back to examining the crime scene. Something was bugging him about the arrangement of the evidence. Footprints in the sand showed there had been at least 4 people there, but the testimony said only 3. He called forensics back to resurvey the area. They found a second gun hidden in a rock crevice, an exact replica of Mercedes's weapon. Ballistics came back with some surprising results. They found 2 bullets of different caliber in Grayson's body. The first shot was fired from 3 meters away, the second from 5 meters. The time difference between the shots was about a minute. Brooke Everdeen held her composure under new questioning, but details gave her away. Smoking too often, nervously tapping her fingers on the table. Sky told me everything a week before the murder, she admitted. She was scared, said Grayson was becoming obsessed, following her, checking her phone. Why didn't you go to the police? And what would I have said? That the coach was in love with my daughter? That she was reciprocating his feelings herself? Who would have believed he was dangerous? Thornton methodically assembled the mosaic. Surveillance cameras at the gas station showed 3 cars heading toward the lighthouse on the fateful evening, but there was also a 4th, parked there long before the others. Thornton called a final meeting at the police station. In the interrogation room sat all the major figures in the drama. Sky, pale and drained, Mercedes in a severe black dress, Brooke nervously clutching her purse. This wasn't a crime of passion, the detective began. It was a carefully planned murder. The plan was almost perfect, but one thing the killers didn't take into account was that every action has witnesses. He spread the photographs out on the table. A week before the murder, Mercedes Page bought 2 identical guns. She left one at home, hid the other by the lighthouse. She knew her husband was going to meet Sky there. She instigated the meeting herself by causing a scene in the restaurant. Mercedes didn't flinch, only pressed her lips tighter together. You've been following your husband for months. Collected more than just evidence of infidelity. You created the perfect alibi. Everyone in town knew of your jealousy, of his cheating. Murder out of jealousy, what an obvious motive. He turned to Brooke. And you showed up out of the blue. Heard a gunshot, saw Grayson, wounded, but alive. And you decided to finish what you started. Not for your daughter, for yourself. Because 20 years ago, you were the same girl who fell in love with a school teacher. Only your story ended differently. Brooke shuddered. You can't prove anything. Already proved it. Your gloves, Mrs. Page, were found at a gas station. They have gunpowder residue on them. The second gun holds Mrs. Everdeen's fingerprints. And then there's security footage, witness statements, ballistics. I have no regrets, Mercedes said suddenly. Her voice sounded calm, almost detached. He would have kept going. Other girls, other families. Someone had to stop him. And you decided to become judge and executioner? I decided to protect those who would come after Sky. As the police officers handcuffed Mercedes and Brooke, Sky finally cried. For the first time since the night of the murder. The trial was short. Mercedes Page got 15 years for premeditated murder. Brooke Everdeen got 8 years for accessory after the fact. Sky left to study in California, away from memories of Portsmouth. A year later, Detective Thornton stood at the lighthouse, looking out at the dark waves. He was holding a letter from Sky. She'd gotten into medical school, started a new life. In the envelope was a photograph, a smiling girl against the ocean, not at all like the pale shadow he'd last seen. On the back of the photo was written, "Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find your way. Thank you for helping me out of the darkness." Thornton tucked the letter into his pocket and stood by the water for a long time, thinking about the fine line between justice and revenge, about how love can turn into obsession, and pain into a weapon, and how sometimes the worst monsters wear a mask of respectability, and the worst crimes are committed by those who think they are on the side of good. Portsmouth was slowly recovering from the tragedy. The news was changing hands. New teachers were coming in. New students were growing up. But the story of Grayson Page and his killers became an urban legend, a reminder that behind the perfect facades, sometimes the darkest secrets lurk.